Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's panel discussion on the Nominated Member of Parliament NMP scheme. So the NMPs scheme has been with us for well over 30 years already, and over this period of time, it's become almost an institution within our Parliament institution. Many distinguished Singaporeans, prominent members of society, have been appointed NMPs over the years. And so today we're very privileged to have a few of these distinguished members here with us, representing different time periods and the diversity of profiles among NMPs. So we have, of course, Anthea, a social entrepreneur and civil society leader. We have Shahira, orthodontist by training, and Mr. Chandra Mohan Nair, a lawyer. I think they will be able to share their perspectives, representing different groups and constituencies from different time periods about the experience in Parliament. But of course, as we know that for any institution, times change and institutions also evolve. So for example, in Parliament now, we have many more elected opposition members. And so some people would question, is there still a need for the unelected voices in Parliament, NMPs, which is the subtitle of Anthea's excellent compilation of essays in the book. On the other hand, some people may feel that with greater partisanship, maybe there's even greater need for NMPs to provide that sort of balance within Parliament. So I think that these guests I have with me on the panel would certainly be able to share the perspectives and also engage with you on this very important topic of how the NMP scheme can continue to evolve and remain relevant, or if for some of you irrelevant, to Singapore. So to begin with, what I'll do is I'll pose each of them a few questions to get us warmed up. And don't worry, I won't hold the session too long. I will soon turn over to the distinguished audience that we have here for your views and questions. So perhaps I can kick off by asking Anthea, what motivated you to compile this book on the NMP scheme, which you see before you? And also in answer to the question that you actually posed in the title of the book, do you think that based on the reflections of the NMPs, the contributions to the book, have they reinforced in your mind or called into question the continuing need for NMPs in Parliament?
Thanks, Terence. And thank you very much for agreeing to be the moderator for this event. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Also, just want to do a shout out that this is also a hybrid event. So we have Dr. Rainer Tan joining us also on video. He's one of, he is the lead researcher for the book as well, especially on the fun facts and figures that you see in Appendix D of the book. To Terence's question, why the book? I think the question that came to me in June 2021 was, why not a book on the NMP scheme at all? You know, as Terence said, last year on the 10th of September, when we launched the book, was exactly the 32nd anniversary of the scheme, when the NMP scheme was introduced in Parliament in 1990. And so, you know, an institution that's really not new and very much part of our parliamentary process, why hasn't there been a book at all, was what came to my mind. Of course, that came because I was so inspired by my experience, the short 2-year term, but certainly very inspired by the opportunity to be able to sort of speak up on different issues across different communities that I feel very strongly for, and I think that has certainly been a big part of why I felt the book was timely. But I think more important than that is this kind of conundrum that we are in, right? When it comes to the NMP scheme, it's never stopped being controversial. It's never also stopped being dismissed as just a sideshow. One of our fellow NMPs in our cohort with Walter Tessera here, she used to say that we are the sideshow of the sideshow. Discourse in Parliament, right? Especially in a supermajority Parliament. And then the other binary stance is that no, the NMP scheme would keep voters away from the opposition, right? And I think I wish life in the world is always so nicely, packed into a black and white. And I think the NMP scheme allows us to have a more nuanced political conversation, right, within our society, that we're not always so eager to want to push what our political culture or history, for that matter, should be into just one of the neatly organized boxes in the polls. And so I think the book then, hopefully, at least that's what we all, not just myself, but the authors, hope will start a conversation that's a lot more nuanced, textured, and certainly, to invite more critical thinking of what we need as Singapore evolves as a society. And that's something that I think we will discuss more later. To your second question, I think just as the editor, and I actually went through every single essay from my my illustrious all 19 of them, fellow NMPs. I contributed to the last chapter of the book, so there are 20 of us across all the parliament sessions since NMP was introduced. And so that's 8 parliament sessions that we've had NMPs over the 32 years. And so the book, it's really meant to be 3 things. 1, introspective; 2, instructive; and the 3rd, inclusive, right? And so what I'm talking about here is the inclusiveness part of it. And not just in terms of their term of service in parliament, but also in gender, in their background, and in the causes that they speak up for. And so it was very intentional to curate, the book and the authors that way, so that we never really have a clear answer to the question that is the subtext of the title itself. Because I think it's an ongoing question that we should be asking. Are unelected voices still necessary in Parliament? And I think you can't just look at that question and try to answer it without actually understanding the context at any point in time of the parliamentary process, or the political composition at any point in time of for Singapore. And I think for now, the question I would ask back, which is also the title of my chapter, is, are elected MPs enough? So if you turn that question on its head, that's also another question that we should be asking. So no, I guess the long answer to that short question is, I don't think there's a clear answer even after having edited 20 essays for the book. So I'll stop there so that we can have a discussion later.
Thank you so much, Anthea, for providing the context behind the book, as well as even providing greater interest in answering that question in our minds. Now time to Chandra, and you mentioned in the chapter you contributed in the book that you had raised a number of very interesting suggestions in Parliament that range from championing dual citizenship to promoting interracial marriages, and even having the Prime Minister's duties shared among a group of senior ministers. At the same time, you mentioned your realization as an NMP that idealism without actual power did not get you far. So how satisfied are you with the influence that NMPs had in your time and what you observe today? Do you feel that raising these suggestions made a difference, even though they may not be implemented, that they were worth airing and maybe find some resonance in the future?
Was to cajole the minds of members, maybe PAP members, maybe opposition, and food for thought for everyone, including my fellow NMPs. See, when I went into this called, shall we say, part-time politics, I've been a practicing lawyer, and I was in an organization called the Round Table, which I incorporated actually years ago. And my role then was just to incorporate the company. That time it was a society under the Societies Act. And through that, I got a bit involved with quite a lot of political scientists, lecturers, newspaper people, etc. And I got cajoled into being an honorary secretary. And I told them, look, I'll just give you the legal advice, practice, I'm not really involved in this, but that time I was very involved in Law Society and the NUS Society. So I got, anyway, come to think of it, those days I sort of regretted doing it, but I'm quite happy having done it. And when I got involved, there were quite a few lawyers who promised that will help me, but I found out that no. So I had not enough sleep actually. I slept about 4 hours. I do my NMP work, then I rush to my law firm and I do my legal work, litigation, etc. But I came up with ideas. I thought the best way to bring about thinking parliament, so to speak, when I had no power and I knew. So I would raise a lot of issues, especially during budget time, because that is the best time to raise any kind of issue from every sector of society in Singapore, from the president's position, president of Singapore, to the ministries, the prime minister's office, the corrupt investigation bureau. So I asked and asked and asked. And I think Goh Chok Tong once said that this gentleman asked the most number of questions. But you're given 2 to 3 minutes to ask. So every time you ask, you have to go back to sit down. Before you can sit down, Mr. Tabugi, then the Speaker of Parliament will call you back. But it was very exciting. But I raised it for primarily as a Singaporean to cajole people to think about it, not just parliamentarians, but people outside, if at all it's reported. Most of the time it's not. But never mind, it's in Hansard. So the duty of every citizen in Singapore and thinking resident in Singapore is to cajole the mind of each other. I'm using the word cajole by chance actually, but really it is our duty to do and be idealistic. And you have to be pragmatic, but pragmatism must be close to idealism. If not, the standard of pragmatism is low, if you know what I mean. So I raised this and I gave my reasons, but I had about 2 to 3 minutes to speak. So I just gave, etc. from whether there's a need for the Istana even. And I said, the Istana cost us so much, and is it really practical and feasible? So how much does it cost? So Mabota will come and say, look, it's a heritage building. I say, you have destroyed so many heritage buildings. One more won't make a difference. So I say, if you really need to have it it's a bulwark. Things like that. So anyway, probably in Hansard, but I raise this not...
It's also in the book. He did mention that.
Yeah, not to joke about it, but just to raise issues for all of us to think. And as a good Singaporean, you must be cynical and critical, but praise where praise is due. And I think I did a reasonably okay job with that. But having said that, I don't think I've succeeded, because every time I speak up, I seldom get a response because the whip is not lifted, as in Parliament. Opposition don't speak. NMPs were not really united. We were individuals there. If I had to redo it all over again, I would become a politician. I would strategize. We did not. We all went there, we did our piece of work, went back to a full-time profession. So we were part-timers. So once I remember talking to, in Parliament itself, I told the government whip, I think it was Mr. Wong Kan Sek, who was then the Deputy Prime, who was then the Home Affairs Minister, I think. I said, give us the personnel. I always advocated that Parliament should consist of all the young graduates in political science, psychology, in law, in the humanities and scientific. And they must give us the papers for us to do a good reading and have high standards of parliamentary debate. So Wong Kan Sek told me, you go and do your own homework. So I asked him, who does your homework? I say, you have about probably hundreds of permanent secretaries and civil servants and all. I say, you have all these papers with you. You don't even give it to your fellow MPs from what I hear. Never mind the opposition or NMPs. But anyway, that remained. I think till today it remained. So I think the Speaker of Parliament should do something about this, to professionalize parliamentary institution with good thinking Singaporeans from different walks of life. And I tell you, then the standard goes up. So to answer it, I think I've not succeeded, but never say die. We'll try, go on doing it. And Straits Times might now report it, but I hope others would do. And the internet would do all that. So I think it takes a long time, but I think it's very important to keep on coming up with ideas. It may sound a little altruistic, sometimes a bit idealistic at times, but I think we must do it. And slowly but surely, the interest will be increased. So I remember those days I even went to give a talk at Raffles Institution and RGS, Raffles Girls' School. I talked to them about having a junior parliament. The children all clapped, but I was never invited after that. But it's very important. You have a junior parliament with a senior parliament, and 1 week in a year, there's a debate between the two. Let the best idea win. So you bring the children in, and they get interested, and the energy level would go up, So I think, we should keep on trying, never say
I
die.
think you're doing something like that soon. Yeah, maybe it was your idea that it stole. No, they have a model parliament for a while, actually. So the speaker himself is personally very invested in that. But it stopped during COVID. No, they have started it, Chandra. I have to. This one, I must also give credit to the speaker and Parliament House. They have actually started that. It's been going on for a few years.
But even that, when I suggested that Ministry of Education responded, they say, no, we have debates in school and all. I say, no, it was institutionalized. Make it really serious, And so I think the standard of debate and parliamentary sessions and all needs to be improved. Sometimes when I sit in Parliament, I listen. Sometimes the response and the silence is deafening.
I think our panel members has already given us a microcosm of the lively and exciting debates when NMPs get together. Thank you so much, Chandra, for giving us food for thought and also cajoling the mind, as you put it. I'd like to turn to Shahira. You mentioned that you have multiple identities, as all of us do in your book, in your chapter, and you don't really like being boxed into the idea of being a youth NMP, which is sort of informal title that some may have given you. Do you think that various groups such as youth actually need a designated representative? Maybe not the youth, but other groups. And how can NMPs then strike a balance between representing a particular constituency and taking part in wider debates on other issues of public interest?
I think in a sense, I feel like, because I'm part of, people see me as a youth NMP, and I think it's a really important group actually, as it is, because you can only say youth are the voice of the future, right? They're going to become adults. They're going to have your votes. They're going to make the decisions in future. So I actually think that for certain groups, youth or, for example, environment or certain issues that I think have very important consequences for the future, I feel like we should make sure that these functional groups are included. Whether it stays every year or every time that the parliament that dissolutes or something like that, I think this is something that can be looked into. But I think that we should look into some form of representation for certain important groups like youth or environment, or depending on the political situation or whatever situation is happening in Singapore at the current moment. To make sure that certain voices are heard at that current time, that needs to be heard. Whether there are issues that need to be addressed, those voices are heard. So that's what I feel. On whether it is difficult to juggle everything, I think in a sense, every issue actually intersects with many, many other issues. You want to handle this, for example, MOH. You want to say that the healthcare workers, we're not doing enough for the mental health and well-being. But there are also a lot of other issues interconnected with that. So you can't actually even be boxed in. There is no choice but for you to dabble into other kinds of issues, other groups, other organizations. Sometimes, at the start, you may not be even connected to them. But because of your NMP role, because you have to get connected to them, that's when you have to get out, do something, go and talk to a lot more other people so that you have something of value to bring to Parliament.
Thank you, Shahira, for sharing those really valuable perspectives. Now I'd like to turn to actually Dr. Rainer Tan. Sorry I didn't introduce you earlier, but visiting a Fulbright scholar from the University of North Carolina right now, so he's dialing in, and you can also ask him questions later. I think Rainer belongs to that category that actually Chandra mentioned of very, very bright young Singaporeans who are assisting NMPs, in this case Anthea, with many of the interesting statistics in the book on the profile and contributions of NMPs. So based on your research, what were one or two statistics that you found surprising or very interesting? And were there statistics or trends which you found encouraging or discouraging?
thanks so much, Terence, and to the events team, and to this very distinguished panel for the privilege of joining this discussion. I think the question of what was interesting, I think it's hard to answer because there are quite a few things that I thought stood out. Maybe the first thing that I wanted to share is something that is also currently in the news, right? Thinking about how many submissions we have seen for the NMP scheme, over since the scheme started, and I think the Straits Times also reported that this year we had 30 submissions, and this is the lowest since 2001. I would say that one thing I'll point out is that people have been talking about a dip, but this dip is not a new thing. There was a dip sometime, I think, in the 9th sitting of Parliament as well, from 50 to 30 submissions. So but this is even larger dip. And I think this is something that I would love to hear from the panel as well. What you might think, and it might come up later. On some of the possible reasons why. One thing that I also find interesting is not so much what is reported in terms of data, but what is not reported. So for example, we know in more recent years, the report of the select committee started to include how many submissions were from the functional groups and how many submissions were from independent submissions. But what we actually don't really know, and we tried to find out, was in a current batch of selected NMPs, who actually came from the functional groups and who came from independent submissions are not actually reported. And when we try to figure that out, sometimes it's not actually said by the news reports or the reports by the select committee. So this is something that I thought was quite interesting, especially when we are talking about the composition of NMPs in Parliament today. Second, I guess the other statistic that I thought was quite interesting, and this comes from me highlighting some of these quantitative statistics, right? And statistics is that I noticed that since the NMP scheme started, there were a total of since the book was published, I think 29 adjournment motions raised. I think to date is now at 30. There have been 2 private members' bills, raised by NMPs, and 1 parliamentary petition. I think one thing that comes to me is, this is interesting because, I think, how difficult is it for an NMP, to maybe raise some of these things, given that they have the opportunity to do so. That's something that comes to mind and potentially touches on what Chandra was talking about in terms of having that kind of support, legislative support, or having parliamentary support. So I think for that statistic, I'll leave that there, because I think I would love to hear from Anthea, Chandra, Shahira on their experiences with some of these things. And I guess what is also encouraging, the second part of the question, is that throughout the years, in the fun facts and figures, we also kind of track, with each parliamentary batch, how many average PQs or parliamentary questions, bills spoken on, budget debates spoken on, and we compare that between NMPs versus elected MPs. And you can see certain trends, for example, with parliamentary questions, much earlier on, NMPs were sort of leading, in terms of the average number of parliamentary questions asked. And you see elected MPs sort of catching up in some way, and it makes you wonder, how NMPs have been contributing to the parliamentary discourse and also potentially leading the way in terms of creating certain parliamentary norms. So I think some of these things do come up. We don't actually have the exact reason why, but I think these are some things that seem interesting to me.
Thanks, Reina, for confirming that the NMPs have been above average productivity and also encouraging the elected MPs to be more productive. So, no pressure, of course, on the current NMPs like Shahira. I would like to just ask one more question, which all the panel members and Reina can also contribute to, and then before we open it up to the floor. So this question is, what is one change or tweak to the NMP system that you think you would like to see, and why do you think it's important? Maybe Anthea can go first.
I actually raised quite a number of aspirations, maybe it's a better word, in the chapter as well. If you want me to bring it down to just one, I think it would be. My mind is still working on all these three that I want to say they are important. But certainly, immediately what we can do for sure is to provide legislative and secretarial support to all NMPs. I think that Walter Tessera and I, we both raised this, during our term. For those of you who may not know, the NMPs and NCMPs, the non-elected constituency members of parliament, they NCMP, non-constituency member of parliament. So we don't get paid the same level as their elected MPs, right? The NMPs and NCMPs are paid at 10%. So I don't think we need to quibble on the salary aspect of it, which was what I raised, to the speaker. But I think if we are expected to show up completely in Parliament within the hallowed chamber to contribute in the discourse, then the legislative work that we do is no less than that of the elected MP, right? We don't do the groundwork, but we do the same legislative work. And I think, therefore, the same level of legislative and secretarial support should be given to NMPs. To Chandra's point, well, we're all part-timers, right? We all know that. Even our elected MPs are part-timers, right? We don't really have full-time politicians, in Singapore. And I think even because of that, then the more we should have support all around to level the playing field. I also just want to add on why that's important, because actually NMPs may seem to be a sideshow of a sideshow, and Chandra has said that he has put up many ideas and maybe they're not sort of responded to. But I would say that legally we have a lot of powers, right? Because other than not being able to vote for the supply bill, as well as three other things, we actually have a right to vote and speak up on every bill, and also to participate in all the budget debates and the committee of supply debates. And so in that, it means that we have power, or at least we have the platform to raise a lot of these issues, particularly those that are of minority interest, right? Because we are in a majoritarian democracy, so even the opposition members would need to contend with not bringing up, too controversial of issues if they want the majority votes, right? But we all know that there are minority interest groups that need to also be taken care of. And that's where I think the NMPs clearly can play a role. And so having support in terms of resources, for them to do a better job, I think that would be one thing I'll raise. But there's so many others that, we could bring up as well. But I'll let my other colleagues share.
I agree with Anthea. Really, I think if I had to relive and give it a second chance, I would get a bit more organized. And I think it's very important that the NMPs themselves, 8 or 9 of them, get together and work as a team. Unfortunately, I think during my time, I've failed really, and didn't really gel with the others. Not because for any reason, it's just that we just never bothered, I think, So perhaps current NMPs and future NMPs could try and gel themselves together. In fact, Anthea and myself, we have been talking about even forming a society, an alumni, maybe an MP, and so the old, the current, and future could join forces and get the NGOs, etc., to come and help, so that the synergy of it all can bring about a better quality of debate in Parliament. As I indicated earlier, to me, one of the most important things is to get the full-time staff in Parliament. The infrastructure should be changed a little. Get all these political science graduates, young people who are enthusiastic And actually, these are the people also, when they are so involved and they see parliamentary debates going on, they can be very interested in politics. And they could be the future MPs, not necessarily just NMPs, but even MPs for the opposition or for the opposition, because it serves the interests of Singapore, right? And I think the PAP government should give it some serious thought, because they are in full power almost, So if they can and be magnanimous enough, and one day perhaps parliamentary, future parliament could do that. So I think, and that could be a very strong force. Besides, I think like Anthea says, we have a lot of speaking powers actually. You can introduce a lot of things under the Constitution. If you look at the relevant articles in the Constitution, we are given that, and it's a matter of time before I think all this is changed once the powers that be is inclined to do that.
Sure, here.
I think you can see that legislative assistants are actually something we really needed. and I feel it too, honestly, because it is not easy. I mean, Chandra is like a lawyer. Maybe it's easier for him to go through all the bills. But for us to go through many, many pages of bills and legal lingo, it is actually very difficult. And if you want to make sure that you are presenting something that is worth presenting, and something that you don't, that's something, you don't make a fool of yourself also, like, at the same time, you have to make sure there is someone who is trained to help you with it. As it is right now, I'm very lucky because I had a friend who was a lawyer, was able to look through for me, but not many people would have those kind of connections, you see. So one is, of course, the legislative assistance. Two, I think I should bring this up because it's different from what both of them brought up, but because of the fact that I work in a healthcare institution, it wasn't easy to take time off of work. I had patients, and Parliament being Parliament is not like every month, Monday, Tuesday, that is it. Usually what happens is sometimes Monday, Tuesday, it's like, hey, tomorrow have another sitting, and you're like, oh no, your speech hasn't gone yet. Then you have to go. So like, it's actually a national service, you see. And it would really help if companies or employers actually see it as a national service and provide you the leave for it. Because right now it's not. Yeah. At the start, it was like, honestly speaking, the hospital was like, we didn't really ask you to apply for it. It's your own thing. But if your HOD approves and is supportive, we will give you the leave, kind of thing. But it's like,
She hopefully had lah.
Yeah, which I thankfully had. And then in the end, it's like, okay, we'll give you the leave. But I'm the lucky one.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are many ones who may not be so lucky, and they might be representing. They may not be so well. May not be so easy for them to take time off work because there are other responsibilities as well. So I think if it can be recognized as some sort of national service, and this is where you can actually, the companies give you more leave or something like that, then we would actually do a better job, in Parliament, because it's not easy to look through bills. It's not easy to do the research on your own when you are not trained in this. When you go in, you are there representing certain groups. Of course, the advantage is you may either have the expertise, but because some people go in because of their expertise, or some people go in because you are the voice of certain groups on the ground. But this is a whole different skill, and this is a whole different ball game. And it takes a while to actually get the hang of it. And sometimes after 2.5 years, like, hey, it's done. We just got the hang of it.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
So that's something a lot of us feel, actually. Yeah.
If I can carry on, because I was debating between these other two to bring up, and so riding on what Shahira just said, I think for those of you who may not know, the NMP scheme makes each NMP stay for 2.5 years, right, as their maximum in terms of their term of service. And so if, of course, Parliament dissolves within that part of your term, then your term could be shorter. And I think in the history, Raina can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the history of NMP, we even had NMPs who were only NMPs for like a month or something, right? Because their term, they were appointed just when, Parliament was just about to dissolve. And we know that nobody knows when Parliament is going to be dissolved. So I think the 2.5-year term, when it was first scheme was first tabled in 1989 by Goh Chok Tong, there was so much pushback by the government MPs, the PAP MPs themselves, right? So one of the concessions was then to actually make the term not a full term, but half of the parliamentary term of other MPs. I think this is something we maybe want to look at because that's also created, because of that, there are a lot more NMPs. And because of that, there's also a worry about making NMPs lifetime members of Singapore Parliamentary Society, because we could essentially take over by the sheer numbers of it, right? So I think that the term, to Shahira's point, is really true. When you just sort of getting warmed up, you just organize yourselves, well, and then, Parliament could dissolve, or you could actually already come to the end of the 2.5-year term. So that's certainly, I think, a part of the scheme that we should be looking at. I can just sort of hog the mic for one more minute. I think the other is more on the scheme itself. If we truly want to give the NMP scheme a good shot, and if you think about our system of government being a 3-branch one, which is the executive, the judiciary, and parliament, then we should maybe also think about the parliament as a 3-branch one, right? The opposition, the government, and also maybe the NMP, the ruling party, the opposition party, and NMP, to especially check on, the partisan yields that we're seeing, particularly in 2-party systems around the world. Why see all of this is happening around the major democracies and then not do something here? Especially since NMP scheme is already a uniquely Singapore scheme. So if we want to strengthen the institution, then we need more transparency, right, to the scheme. And right now, there's quite a bit of opacity in the selection of NMPs. I'll be very honest with you, I don't even know why I was chosen. I didn't even think I was going to be selected, even though I got called for the final interview. And to Raina's point, we really don't know the sort of the pathways, whether you actually independently submit your application for the NMP scheme, or you come through what he was saying. I don't know whether all of you know that there is actually this sort of functional groups. There are 6 functional groups, and these are sort of business, the labor, professions, and so on, right? People and civic sector, which was the sector I came from. And that each has a functional coordinator that you can submit the submissions through as well. So I think, to Raina's point, even when we're doing the research, we don't know. We know who are how many independent and how many came through functional group in terms of submissions when we check with Parliament and the librarian, but we don't know which of them then become the final MPs, final NMPs, right? So I think some level of transparency will be important. Eugene Tan, one of the contributors, a fellow NMP as well, also has been asking for all submissions to the NMP scheme to also be made public, right? That means, whoever applied for the NMP scheme, that actually we should all know about it. And I think that there's some merit there, right? Because you should be okay to say, hey, I actually put myself up for this because it's a service that I want to do for the country. And then that allows us to also see the kind of quality of candidates that we have. Those would be some things, I think.
Thank you for all those suggestions, which will probably make it even more attractive for us, maybe some of the people in the audience to put themselves forward. Maybe turn to Raina as well, since you looked at the statistics. Is there some suggestion you can make from the outside as well about how to improve the NMP scheme?
Yeah, so I actually wanted to address Anthea's point and question. So out of fun facts and knowledge, right? I think the shortest term, actually, I think Chandra was part of that term where it was 17 days, right? Right before they passed the amendment in Constitution. in the constitution to extend from
very
2.5 years.
short-lived in 2001. So when I got that, I was quite shocked and disappointed. My ego went down, Said, not good enough, what? So we wanted to apply a second time, but the indication from the Prime Minister then, Mr. Goh Chok Tong, was, no need, you're automatically in. So we served another 2.5 years, So from 2001 to 2004, we served, and we became a bit more garang.
That doesn't happen anymore. It's not automatic.
Nowadays, I'm not sure.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But sorry, I think you please carry on. Yeah. Because I want to say something else.
Oh no, please go ahead. The other thing I wanted to point out was, I think in terms of like a actual short term, I know that term was special because like a lot in 2015. So Anthea is right, like you could serve up to 2.5 years, or it could just be like 1 year if they call the general elections earlier, or it's not even at the point of the GE, is when they dissolve parliament to call for it. So I think perhaps this coming term might see that also, given that there's some talk around how the transition might be earlier. Actually, to Terence's question very quickly, like and for me, I don't have the lived experience of being an NMP, and if I were to see from an outsider, and also, based on my training as a public health researcher, maybe I echo everyone's points, right? Like, how do you answer the question, how have NMPs contributed when you don't have a comparable basis to, make that kind of evaluation? So if you see the stats in the book, you'd be tempted to sort of like compare the contributions of NMPs to elected MPs, NCMPs, but, I think one thing that makes comparison a lot better, and to draw certain kinds of correlations and make certain statements around causation, is to make sure that there is a level playing field, that things are comparable. If you want to talk about like legislative assistance, and stuff like that, I think these are some things that also are things that one should take in consideration when comparing contributions as well.
Thank you so much, Rin. Did Chandra want to say something before we turn over to the audience?
Just keep my mind up.
Okay.
But, looking at the NMP scheme also, correct me if I'm wrong, the whole scheme when Mr. Goh Chok Tong introduced it was very innovative in a way. But I'm told, I may be wrong, but it was introduced originally in Africa for the African woman. Because whenever the ladies stood for elections, they, male chauvinists or whatever, they seldom won. But when through this equivalent scheme was introduced, and the ladies in parliament did a tremendously fantastic job. So next time around when they stood for elections, they got in, because they found that actually ladies were really good. And let's face it, they are superior to us, they're really good. And it evolved, and I think Mr. Goh Chok Tong gave us that impetus to do it. Like Anthea says, there were opposition from both the proposition and opposition too. During my time, we had Chiam Si Tong and Lau Tia Kiang. He said, Chandra, you are going through this the back door and all that. Come and join us.
Yeah.
So,
right.
with Chiam Si Tong, I said, cannot, because, others asked me then, got to be fair, but I'm more into NGO. Then Lau Tia Kiang asked me, I said, no. Chiam asked me, I said, no, I can't say. So I got out of it. So I want to remain really impartial, truly just Singapore, And that kind of concept, and when you want to think of that, you ask yourself, in Singapore, we are a modern society. We are very successful, economically speaking. So, and we have the brains, we have the people, the manpower. Then you ask yourself, do we need political parties? I've been thinking about it, of course, being an idealist, So, let's say you stand in societies, in institutions, you stand on your own steam. You don't say, I belong to party A or party B in the NUS society or law society or medical society or whatever. You stand on your own. Then you say, what's your manifesto? My manifesto is simple. I serve Singapore in whatever way I can. So I don't need to be PAP or Workers' Party or whatever. I stand on my own steam. Let the best 200 top win, go into parliament. Then what happens in parliament? Well, work together. You create an institution called the president or chairman or or Secretary General or whatever and work on it. I'm not saying it's going to happen straight away, but an enlightened society of togetherness, working together as one society. There's no need for proposition and opposition and government whips, etc. If not, they can't talk. These are all archaic British system that we should get rid of. So we must start with the young. That's why I wanted to go to RGS, this one, plant all this in there. See. But all I'm saying is I mean well for Singapore as a whole. When I was sitting in Parliament, I say, what a waste of a lot of time in just debating. At the end of the day, what for? All bring their best ideas in and you become parliamentarians. Don't have to label them in any way, but it's for food for thought and debate. Yeah.
Yeah, if I can actually respond to, I'm not trying to start a debate here, but I think that's a great, suggestion that Chandra has put forth for all of us to think. Is that something that's even doable, right? To not actually have political parties. I think maybe to your point, political parties need to evolve, need to take on a different kind of role. Maybe even internally, we need to, reorganize the political parties because it's still very much based on the Westminster model, the whip and all of that. And for the government to have MPs get on the political appointment route to become a cabinet minister and stuff like that. I would agree that we need to look at that. But I think there's also the need to look at how do we organize the ideas into action, right? It's very well that there are ideas that are being put forth, but I think more importantly is how do we then translate that into action? For the very people that we speak up for, I think that's where the challenge then comes in, where you do need some sort of organized structures, and what those organized structures look like and how do they function. I think that's the second question to discuss. I think just sharing a bit of my personal experience, because of what I do, I'm not sort of tied to an employer, so I didn't have the challenge that Shahira had in terms of taking time off. I have to say that my 2-year term was a full-time job for me as an NMP. And on top of that, I had to organize, and thankfully, because I came from the civil society, from the people and civic sector before I was appointed an NMP, when I became an NMP, I could call on all of the different groups to then support, right? And so some of you may already be on the group chat. So that was the only way to organize. So I didn't have legislative assistants, but I had legislative angels because they're really my angels, right? They were not doing it because they were paid. And without that, I don't think there's any way, to do what I could do or what I did in the 2-year term. And so I think comes back to not just having the support resources, but also to how to organize, ourselves as NMPs. And I think a question of if the NMPs organize amongst themselves, then do they then become themselves a political party as well, right? That represents a different ideology. And so those are some of the questions that I think we need to also put out there.
Yeah, thank you so much. I've been on quite a few panels recently, but this is one of the most fascinating with lots of thought-provoking ideas that I've been on recently. So now I think it's time to open it up to the audience because I'm sure many of you are dying to ask your questions to the panel members and Reina as well.
In Parliament, do they see the NMPs as one group or do they see you as individuals?
The impression I had was they don't see us as a group, but to be fair, I think they were very sympathetic, at least during my time. The ministers, that time Prime Minister was Mr. Goh Chok Tong, Deputy was Lee Hsien Loong, Senior Minister was there staring at all of us, but he never spoke much at all, in fact hardly, But I think overall they treated us well, and especially when you have tea breaks and all that, you get tea and some kuehs and all, And the lady MPs were very kind to us, So we were very popular. But overall, I think they looked at us as really impartial, independent, and there was a lot of support, in many ways, But they left you alone, decide and do it yourself without much real assistance in Parliament. And even the opposition treated us as okay, but what are they doing here? That kind of, but that time there was only Chiam Si Tong was my friend, Anthea Ong who became my friend. Yeah. That was my experience.
So, I'm still in Parliament now. So, in a way, they see us, the NMP group, but I would have to say that they know us individually pretty well and what we represent, what our experiences are. And they will approach us on topics that are relevant to us. So they do know each person very well. They do treat us very well, even until now. And sometimes on certain issues, they do want to know what we think. Yeah. Or what we're going to vote or something like that. So, yeah.
That's a nice segue for what I'm going to share. They want to know how we vote. And that's, I think, where we sometimes forget, right? And I'm gonna just raise this because that was a very fascinating thought that was put forth by then MP Shanmugam, now, as we know, Law Minister and Home Affairs Minister. So in that debate that I talked about in 1989, when the scheme was tabled, Shanmugam was for it, right? And in support of the bill, he mentioned that given that Singaporeans wanted more diverse voices in Parliament, this scheme will help to do that. Why? Because if we are appointing distinguished members of society to become NMPs, and they are non-partisan, then the government will find it very hard to explain away what they raise, right? Because if it's raised by an opposition, and we have all seen this, right? This is a political play. You could always explain away based on their partisan agenda. But if it's raised by an NMP, then there's no, we're not getting votes. We're not doing this, for anything else other than speaking up, as, Chandra said, for Singapore. Then the government will find it very hard to explain away what we raise. And I shared this in the book as well, that when Walter and I and Irene raised the amendment motion for POFMA, it was also, clear that because we started questioning, the law, and not that we did not agree with the intent of the bill, we wanted to make amendments to some parts of the bill to make sure that, we can protect, what is to come, especially if we have a new government. We were actually very, in no uncertain terms, told that when NMPs put forth a motion like this, the public may think it's a bad law, right? So there's a lot of weight that's carried by the NMPs, and especially, now the supermajority situation means NMPs' votes may not be so critical. At least it doesn't tip the balance yet. But I think in sort of the emotional aspect of it, that could actually be quite a powerful demonstration, right, to the public if NMPs are not, standing with a law that the government, puts forth. And so I think those are the important things to consider as well in terms of, where we stand. So I think it's a long way to answer your question. For me, I think Walter can also share with you, I think by default of the scheme, because we come from different functional sectors, so to speak, I don't think necessarily they do see us as as a group, as collective. But I think, through the history of NMP scheme, you have seen some MMPs, not all. I don't think there's ever been a single parliament session, Rainer can correct me if I'm wrong, that actually all the NMPs come together to put forth a motion or a German motion or even a, amendment motion. But there have always been, like the ones that we did with Walter, myself, and Irene, and then I think there were also one by the group before on the education motion, and of course, coming up, the current batch as well. So a few might come together, but I don't think we've ever seen the entire cohort of NMPs coming together.
Hi, my name is Ernest Khan. I come from the governing board of the school here.
Thank you for
I always like to attend sessions like this in the LKY school because it is not only provocative, but is provide a lot of insights. So thank you, the panel, for your sharing. I find it very, very insightful. The background to my question is you already articulated the scheme itself. That up to today is like almost 33 years old. In theory, it's very established, but I heard that I can sense the frustration as you serve while you are doing great job for the nation. And when Koh Chok Tong came up with this scheme, of course Koh Chok Tong now is my chairman at the school here, that is very innovative, and I think it has served the Singaporeans well as a whole. So my question is, you see, it's a 33-year-old scheme. At that point, you had fewer members of parliament. The constituency was, I think, was it less than 80? And today you have 93. Also, when this scheme was set up some 33 years ago, there wasn't the NCMP, the non-constituency member of parliament. And today you have. And also today you have, like, I think as of now, correct me if I'm wrong, they've got 10 opposition members from Workers' Party sitting in the parliament. So with the evolution of the Singapore parliament up to this point, that we have NCMP, we still have this scheme, we have elected opposition members. I know the good intention of this scheme, very innovative. You mentioned the 6 profession that it represents, plus some independent members that get interviewed and then selected or nominated. But in terms of the sustainability of this scheme as NMP, now that you have got elected opposition members, you have also got the NCMP. The sustainability of this scheme, you think is going to be still going on forever? If it does, how is this group going to contribute? Because you already said, in terms of constituency, there's a lot of struggle because the elected MP have got the constituency. But I guess for the 6 profession or function, they are okay. Like, what you shared, that Anthea, you have got your constituency to back you. But for independent, I don't know whether Chandra, you come from the independent side that, of course you have got your law firm to support you. But without a constituency, more so, and, a constituency of population like the elected ones, it's going to be very challenging. So is this scheme going to survive, to put it in short? Very provocative. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think don't answer that because my question is kind of together, so I think you can answer it together.
Please.
Okay, my name is, Francis Pabri. I'll just sit down. I want to put a dampener on this proceeding. Everybody's so enthusiastic, so excited about this NMP scheme. I'm a little bit critical about the system, and in some ways, I feel that the whole, not reflecting the individuals, but the system is very well used by the government for certain purposes. Let's go back a bit of a history when this thing was implemented. This was the early 90s. And as you mentioned, right, I still remember, I'm old enough to remember, Tan Cheng Bock was the one who was very critically against this system. He says there's already a system of MPs who represent the people, and you don't need another group of... So one would think, why was this created in the first place? At that point, if people remember, old enough to remember, there was a calling from the population, we don't have enough opposition. There's not enough opposition. There were 2 members, Cham Si Tong and Loh Tia Kiang, and then there were a few, Chiu Chai Chen and all that, which was very, very small. And there was this, from the population, from the general population, we need more opposition members. So as a government, think about as a government, what is the role of what is the overarching objective of any government in power? Its overarching objective is to stay in power. That's quite clear of any democratic system. The overarching objective of any party in power is to stay in power. So now you have this from the ground, people wanting to have an opposition. So what do you think the government does? Let's think, how do we appease these people? Let's create schemes where we have this kind of opposition. So that's how the NMP scheme came about. It was deliberate. It was thought through. how do we appease the population who want an opposition? Let's give them a pseudo one, NMPs. And then later on, another pseudo one, NCMPs. So the idea here is create a system that can be used for you as a party in power to strengthen your ability to stay in power. So that's the whole idea of these institutions. It's nothing to do with other groups. And in fact, it's become even worse if you think about it. At least at one point in time, it was the NMPs that were all kind from the public. Now they've even made it even more divisive in some ways. Youth, health, mental health, etc. So it's even hard for these people who are NMPs to get together to talk about something common because they all have their own constituency. So if you think about it, that's what it is, it still is. And in some ways, I feel all these NMP, NCMP are being used. They are instrumental, being used by the government as a way in which they can have a stronger mandate to stay in power. I mean, as Tan Cheng Bock and all they were saying, there is already a scheme, a democratic model, which says we have a scheme. Westminster model works pretty well for them for hundreds, maybe even 1,000 years, right? So we're creating new avenues that strengthens our way to stay. And in some ways, is there a future for this in a real democracy, if you call it?
Two quite related existential questions with Anthea.
So let me leave that answer. Let me leave the question to you.
Yeah, thank you. Chandra, you wanna?
No, in a sense, I hear Francis Bavry and Mr. Ernest. They're all legitimate questions, and there's room for speculation too. Unless the cabinet papers are open, we won't know, right? In a sense, because it's secret. But, when it was introduced, there was all this speculation of. But to me, the reality of Singapore is that when you have an institution like this and it's given birth, make full use of it. Because if you are going to be very critical, there can be many areas where you're critical and you've just become, so to speak, relatively speaking, negative, When I became an NMP, I had those thoughts too. Francis is a dear friend of mine in NUS Society. We've been together and all. But where it is possible, do it. Even round table, even for me, round table public, I came through that avenue actually, not the profession, although I'm a lawyer, And that time, I felt that when I was introduced to this, I had to do it because I was very active in the round table. And actually, I wasn't interested. But that time, one of the senior guys, they said, Chandra, you must do it. I said, no, really, I got Law Society, Guild House, my wife will divorce me, etc., But he approached my wife and said, if you want, you ask my wife for permission. It's like getting a leave pass in national service, And she asked, and the first time she said no. So I was so happy. Second time I was asked, and she said yes. So he said, about time you... I said, did you tell this gentleman that I can stand? I was surprised, actually. I was shocked because then I could not national service, So actually what happened was, so I did, and you see, and when I went into Parliament, I had these mixed feelings too. But I said, if there's an institution, let's do it in the interest of the nation. And who knows, even beyond the shores of Singapore. Really, I was more interested in ASEAN too, how to bring about solidarity and togetherness as best as possible. So my PAP MPs would say, Chandra, you're coming from back door. Opposition also tell me. So I said, yeah, actually it's true. I said, but where are you from? Which constituency? He said, I'm from Sembawang. You, Marine Parade. I said, whole of Singapore. Right? I am serving whole of Singapore. You see, they go by constituency. I am free to say whole of Singapore. Opposition also put it up. So they became my friends slowly. You got to cajole them to an extent that it's togetherness. Work together. And in Parliament, really, when you see the debate, when I say something that I thought was fairly wise and practical, no one speaks. Why? And I asked the PAP friend during tea time we have, I said, hey, why you never spoke? He said, Chandra, you're good and the one not good. But I cannot speak, the whip not lifted. It's true. So I was trying to reinvent all this to see what can be done. So I think together I would say, now that there's a bit more opposition, perhaps you're right. Maybe an NMP scheme may not be as effective, if at all. But then I would look at it and say how to make it more effective. And this is where institutions of higher learning, NGOs, think tanks, all of us must speak up as diplomatically as possible and cajole the cabinet and all of them to see the light. Right? They must. You see, like Francis says, the role of a political party is to win the next elections, and if in the process it serves the nation, wonderful. So I think, but at the same time, the citizenry, we gave them the power, and then they become so powerful, they rule us. So when you give that power to them, it's about time we spoke a bit more with that power. If not, you're just giving away the power too easily. It is a sign of resignation. So I think all of us got to speak up, and I think we'll be a better society as long as our intentions are genuine, a goodness, and the whole idea is oneness of society. And so in Parliament, it must be a reflection of that oneness of society. And that's when the spirit and the soul of the nation is enlightened. Today, I don't think we have reached that level yet. It will take many generations from now, but we have to germinate that seed and water it and plant it, and we get a strong Tembusu tree one day. Yes, my political speech.
He's preparing for the next general election.
Yes, I agree with all, but never mind. And the beauty is we must have differences of ideas. And that's the beauty of a nation that is enlightened and democratic.
I'll try. And thanks for raising that, and Ernest too for the question. Thanks for raising your thoughts about this as well, Francis. I think the book clearly shows that even the ones who have been NMPs also think that the scheme needs to be made irrelevant, right? And I think there's a time issue here. So there's an evolution here, especially for those of us who have been in there. But I would also like to challenge that if NMPs were taking away the votes from the opposition, then we wouldn't have seen what happened in GE 2020, right? Where we, for the first time, had 10 opposition voices and 2 GRCs going to the opposition. So I guess no one would know the real reason, I guess, but, and I'm not saying that NMP the scheme has contributed to that per se, but I think as you correctly put, it is not, the scheme may be somewhat defective in a traditional democracy, right? As we see what democratic models are. But the individuals within that scheme, to Chandra's point, can make a difference, right? Can actually raise issues that represent the people, that will not be raised by both the ruling party and maybe even the opposition party. And I know for a fact that because of some of the issues that we raised, that actually allow the government MPs and the opposition MPs to raise them. And these are obviously the minority issues that will be, costing politically either side to actually raise them, right? And I will share that some of this would be migrant workers, LGBTQ community. Those are issues that really affect people who call Singapore home, right? But there's no political advantage for even opposition parties to raise this. But if NMPs could actually open the door for that, then it doesn't get hidden away, and then allows a bit more of a vibrant discourse amongst their government MPs and opposition MPs on these issues as well. So I think the book is to create that conversation. It really seemed to me, as I go through the research in preparing for the book, it comes down so much to the individual for now. And so then the question, because if you look at what had been brought forward in terms of whether it's private members' bills or motions or even some of the PQs, parliamentary questions and bills that had been spoken on, it did come down to individuals and not so much about the scheme per se. And which is probably why I think, other than the legislative support, to make sure the individual really does his or her very best once appointed, is also the fact that we need to make the selection process a lot more transparent. Right? We need to know why and how these NMPs are selected. Because to your point, for instance, if we don't know, then yeah, it could be used as another way of putting more sort of, I don't really like to use this word, but maybe, you have a bit more pro-establishment figures in the scheme. But I think it does come down to the individual ultimately to make the scheme work. And then to actually contribute by raising some of these controversial issues. It may then get the citizenry to start thinking more about what are the issues that are needed. And then maybe, for once, let's not keep saying that NMP scheme would take away opposition votes, right? Let's then, as citizens, then exercise our vote, our right as a citizen with a vote. And if you need more of these issues to be raised that are not going to be raised by the government MPs, then we need to show that at the ballot boxes. But hopefully the NMPs allow some of these, issues to be raised in Parliament that then, set the pathway, I think, for the citizen.
I think in a sense, because I am part of the Parliament where there's a lot more opposition, and I do see that it's getting a bit more contentious. And I feel that as each party gets more entrenched in their own ideological positions, we NMPs actually have our own advantage in a way, because we are unencumbered by the whip or the votes. But like Anthea said, it also depends on the particular NMP whether they are able to voice out their opinions and their votes and things like that. So in a way, I feel that we do have a special part to play. Sometimes when we put forward our ideas, honestly, because it comes from us, it's a bit more palatable, even though it may be something similar to what the opposition says. And I've seen that in Parliament as well. Yeah, maybe I don't get shot down, but the opposition gets shot down. So in a way, it's a very useful. I'm gonna say, in a way, it's advantages that what we say gets taken into account, and all this politicking or fighting doesn't get. It's just a solution. It's something that we put forward. Let's not fight over it, kind of thing. Yeah. So I think that what Anthea said was right. Because of the fact that NMPs are supposed to be neutral, I feel like if the selection process is more transparent, or if we were to have actually more opposition on the panels, like for me, when I was interviewed, there's only one. If maybe there were equal numbers opposition and equal numbers the ruling party, then maybe it would seem that we are not so maybe part of the general pro-establishment. Yeah. So I think we do have a part to play. I did have accidental questions when I came in as well. My husband also said that many times. Yeah, so even my family members. But I do think that we actually did well. We actually can contribute something. Yeah, and we're not just like the sideshow.
Raina, would you have anything to also add? Any thoughts?
One thing I would say is that isn't it so much more interesting to hear from people with lived experience as NMPs, right? So I won't weigh in on that. But as someone who is in the social service sector, right? I do work with substance use, LGBTQ plus individuals, like Anthea was saying. I think as someone who's part of that sector, it has been especially in the last couple of years during COVID. Anthea also led a lot of these conversations in Parliament as well. So I do see it as someone who is doesn't have the experience of being in Parliament, but from a social service sector or as like a beneficiary myself, these are some things that do matter for me, looking up at parliamentary discourse. So that's what I also add to the conversation.
Okay, thank you so much for all these perspectives. Maybe we can take a few more questions from the audience, and I'd like to also wrap up with a final question at the end for all the panel members to weigh in. What are your aspirations for, the incoming cohort of NMPs in terms of what you hope they will contribute or their profile and so on? But maybe I think we can have a couple more questions, I think.
It's about parliamentary performance of NMPs, and you all shared quite a bit about the challenges that you all faced in the books, especially almost every single chapter, in some shape, way, or form, the NMPs were like, oh, we are doing it by ourselves, or sourcing support, or sourcing information or data. There's a myriad of challenges. And I think Mr. Chandra and I think a couple of other MPs as well have mentioned about how you need legislative support, legislative assistance. So my question, I guess, is more to that. And my understanding is that the pay for legislative assistance is currently, I think, 1.3K. And that, again, correct me if I'm wrong, that hasn't changed since 1989.
Yeah.
So take home would be around 1K. Secretarial support is about $500 per month. I may be wrong. Please feel free to correct me here. So I guess my question is, how do you incentivize people who are graduates or people from regular society to work in this? And there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of research to be done, especially if you're making suggestions or criticisms of existing this thing. The government is usually quite, you want to make sure that you have your facts right. So how would you, what are your comments or thoughts on that when it comes to incentivizing people to be LAs?
Yeah, my name is Han Zong. I first joined civil society through the then Malayan Nature Society. This is for the appreciation of the Malayan Peninsula. So I think I like to speak for planet Earth, actually. So I support your idea, sir, that many of our critical issues of the day actually goes beyond national boundaries. Yeah, and insofar the political system here, my first question is, some of you all talked about asking questions of the government. So while we have the Official Secrets Act, should we also have a Freedom of Information Act so that anyone in public can ask the questions and not have to go through NMPs or their even parliamentaries to do that? Yeah, that's my first question. Question I think has already been answered in terms of... okay, the next question is in terms of semantics. I noticed that most of us are using the term opposition politics. So in terms of development of politics, should we use the term alternative politics instead? So it's not seen as confrontational. In Taiwan, I was told that they don't use the term 反对党, they call it 在野党. So that in a sense, it's just, when you are non-partisan or a-partisan, we are for planet Earth, we are for where we're living. Yeah, and it's not just, a contestational politics. Yeah. Sorry.
And
the next thing, of course, in terms of parliamentary democratic politics, will you see a transition from first past the post to what do we call that?
Proportional.
Yeah, proportional representation. And will that evolve in the near term? The last one is, I see in terms of global politics, we start from supermajoritarian to bipartisan, and then next there seems to be a evolution to a kingmaker party, which are usually the green parties. So my question to you is, do you think Singapore will ever evolve to that stage where we will have kingmaker parties? With green politics, perhaps LGBT issues being even more prominent in future.
Thank you so much. So I think we can give all of our panel members a chance to weigh in. You don't have to address all the issues. And also my final question, which is what you hope to, see your aspirations for the next cohort of NFPs. Thank you.
Well, to the best of my recollection of your questions and the gentleman front, I think in terms of proportional representation, and first past post, I think first past post is going to stay for a long time, but a lot depends on the government of the day. But I would think that there are pros and cons to all this. Like if you take the Scandinavian countries, there are a lot of proportional representation. I think it's a great idea. So it's something to evolve, and we need not follow exactly what is going on in the world. In my view, it's just like saying in the old days, one is a communist, socialist, capitalist, Democrat, etc. We are a mixture of everything, aren't we? One night I'm a communist, the next day I'm a socialist, the next day I'm a capitalist. So it's all labeling, you know. At the end of the day, we are a mixture of most of these things at different times, and depending on our mood and what's going on with our lives, you know. So proportional representation, I'm for it actually, but maybe we got to fine tune it and see what is best. This is where I think think tanks and all can come up with papers. You know, I don't see like the university or think tanks coming up and presenting it. Maybe because it's not published, maybe it's somewhere else. But I think if all this can be thought through, I think all of us can participate. And I think this is where we can, think tanks should present papers to various organizations, the professional bodies, to cabinet, etc. I think there's some room for improvement compared to earlier years. So I think I have hope. It's always one step forward, two steps back, but I think you must take that first step forward. And then hopefully, there will be some sort of support within the powers that be. I think in terms of Freedom of Information Act, yes, I'm all for it. But I'm a lawyer. I'm a very more liberal than I think quite a few people, but I think we should have it. I think we should press home these things more and more until it becomes a talking point by the majority of citizens. And parks and all, I think NParks is doing a wonderful job, and Nature Society, etc. I'm all for this. Whatever you say, I agree with you. But how do we go about doing that slowly but surely? And I think we must always take the initiative. And when you have good energy stated in some form, the good energy will flow into that good energy and make it doubly strong, And I believe in that. In karma, I have no scientific knowledge of all those things, but I believe there's, I think, a brain in the heart, besides the brain on the head. So that brain in the heart will somehow come out with wonderful things, I'm a marriage solemnizer, by the way. I solemnize wedding. I give wonderful speeches like this. And when I go home, my wife will say, "Can you practice what you're preaching?" So I'm a fantastic for one night. The next day, GCL again, no? But what I'm saying is, when you do all this, it makes you feel good, And I want to do more and more, So I think in all this, I agree with you. And, and the performance by NMPs, what needs to be done, I think we have indicated earlier what it is. I won't repeat because time is short, and I think so all in all, I'm all for whatever you're saying. I'm for it, and and I hope it comes to fruition during my lifetime. I'm already 73, maybe another 10 years more. Hopefully, can do what I can. Right now, I do through the Law Society, Guild House, etc. But never say die, lah. Carry on doing it. And that in itself is a reward, and the reward is just doing it. And the other reward is friendship. Through what you're doing, you create fantastic friendship. And then you die peacefully,
Thank you, Shahir.
Okay, it's quite a lot of questions. So legislative assistants, how can we incentivize them? Actually, I was always wondering whether we can have partnership with IHLs, honestly, because I bet there's a lot of students there who will have a lot to say and who can actually contribute quite a bit, and they can have a lot. I mean, it looks good on the CV as well, I should think. And if the universities want to work with Parliament, I think that's great, So yeah, that's one idea. Freedom of information, I think I'm all for it. I mean, right now we have public consultations. That's how I'd say the government says that we are engaging in the public. But sometimes there's an issue with the visibility of what happens after that. So if we have this, of course, I think, legally, I don't know what repercussions or what kind of things we need to think about. Proportional representation. I mean, I'm thinking this is what is similar that's happening in New Zealand, is it? In which you have made sure that there's a certain number of women, certain number of indigenous representation. I think that's a really great way forward. The only issue, of course, is that who gets that representation. I think that is something that is a bit something that needs to be discussed, and it's actually very important because it can actually be quite contentious on who needs the representation. But I feel like the main thing is that the spirit of it is that you need to make sure that with people who are not easily represented do get represented in Parliament. So this is an idea. Maybe something similar to that can happen in future, but if it does, I think it's only for the best. Yeah. You spoke about kingmaker parties. I'm actually not politically trained, so I'm not sure what kingmaker parties is. So I think I'll leave that to Anthea.
No, actually, we should leave it to them. Karen should also answer Chandra's question why the think tanks are not coming out with all this for the government to consider.
Yeah, so maybe we could turn to Reina and then I'll leave the last word to Anthea.
Okay.
I mean, the only thing that I would touch on is like parliamentary performance, right? And I think what's been spoken about is the need for transparency for all these things. And one thing that we notice is just that there's fluctuation in parliamentary performance. If you count parliamentary performance as like how much activity, parliamentary questions, how many bills you have spoken on, and so on. And I think as long as there's a lack of transparency, you could also argue that the parliamentary performance is a function of how much the select committee, which largely comprises, members of like the People's Action Party, for example, like how much intention there is to make it, like a more active, NMP group. So I think in spite of that, you do see fluctuation, you do see, NMPs making that kind of contribution from parliamentary batch to batch, right? So I think there's no clear trend in that case, but you would see that there are contributions made with every parliamentary batch. So I think that's the only point that I would address.
Thank you, Reina. And last word for Anthea.
About, I think the salaries and how it's not been changed, and then of course tying that to parliamentary performance. Yeah, you're right. It's not been changed. Walter, Sarah, and I talked about this, and we think which is also why during our term we raised this, right? Not so much just the salaries of the NCMPs and NMPs, which was not such a big focus for us, but more the legislative assistant and the secretarial assistant. And actually it's not just for the NMPs, but for everyone, because that affects the kind of, I would say that is a proxy to the kind of quality that you would get as well. And so what often happens is that you see even the elected MPs come together to share a legislative assistant, just to be able to get higher quality support. But then you will have to question, then how would they be individually or independently putting forward their views if they are supported by the same person, right? So yeah, those are the things that I think we definitely need to question and put forth. It's not something that the government is definitely placing a lot of attention on. So I think we need to just keep plugging this issue. On the Freedom of Information Act, I actually raised this in Parliament. I would say that maybe when I realized that it was not going to happen anytime soon, obviously, is why I absolutely maxed out the quota of 5 parliamentary questions every sitting, right? Because then we can ask, at least for me, because I support the people and civic sector, and actually beyond that, I could ask the questions for information that we cannot get. And it's not for any other reason except to actually for the civil society to be able to better do their work, to support the groups that they support, right? I remember the Singapore Association of the Deaf said they don't even know how many deaf people there are in total. So then how would they be able to plan their services? And so many a time, and even in terms of like knowing what is the kind of the level of domestic violence, right, that we have, maybe in terms of the kind of socioeconomic segments and all of that, so that we can then, be more targeted, right, in terms of the support. So until we get the Freedom of Information Act, FIA, then I think the MPs need to play a super big role in getting this information. And so personally, I don't think anyone should, any MP should waste the 5-question quota. I think Walter and I share that. We kind of max it out and then we pass to each other if we still have questions to ask. So definitely, we need that. It's not for any subversive reason, but for civil society, for us to better organize ourselves on the ground, and especially to support the vulnerable communities. That's really, really important. I think the question about should we move from where we are now, which is first past the post, which is a majoritarian democratic model, to one that is more proportional in terms of representation. I think this is one of the questions that we ask in the book. Right? What is the parliament that we deserve as Singaporeans? And that is not for any of us here to answer, to be honest. I think Singaporeans need to step forward to answer that. And I think we are seeing that with GE 2020, where more Singaporeans are speaking now with their votes, but I think it should go also beyond just every 5 years or, every 4.5 years at the ballot boxes. What do we do in between the general elections in wanting to make sure our elected representatives, our parliamentary system, our ministers, how are we bringing forward what we want, what we need, and what we deserve? And that, I think, is a question that needs to be one that's put forth by Singaporeans. I don't think it should just be limited to a few of us. Academically and theoretically, we know that many countries have experimented with a combination, right? In the Philippines, they have first past the post, but there's also the party list, right? So there's also some proportional representation there. But, talking to my fellow MPs from Philippines, I can tell you that tons of issues with all of that. It's so political, to Shahira's point. Who gets to be the representation groups, and then that becomes another political maze to navigate. But yeah, definitely we can't just stay with the 200-year-old system of just first past the post. I would say the NCMPs, the NMP schemes are our way of trying to get some representation that's beyond just a majoritarian one. And I do think the majoritarian model is flawed, right? We've seen it with Brexit, right? We've seen it also here, actually. It doesn't mean that, because it then means that unless it's a majority issue or predominant narrative, then even the opposition parties won't raise it. And to that point, I think you're right. We should actually change. I don't think it's just semantics. I think it's also a recognition of maturity of us as a democracy, that why do we want to see this as binary, right? So maybe it's not just the government MPs, but also alternative MPs. And that's why in the more mature democracy, you have the shadow cabinet. And that's hopefully something we can work towards. We do have the GPCs, but obviously now we know it's still very much restricted to the government MPs. So that's I think we're seeing glimpses of it, trying to come to something that is more uniquely Singapore, but that should be a call for all Singaporeans to make, actually. And I don't know how we will organize that, but one forward conversation that we should have is probably this, right? What is the parliament that we want going forward? And yeah, I won't talk about the others, but I think to answer Terence's question, and so we have 30 applicants, one of the lowest. So there are many. I was asked actually in an interview by Straits Times what I think might be the reason for this low number of submissions this time. I think it's a combination. Obviously, there's been a lot of speculation that Parliament's going to dissolve because the election's going to come. And so maybe, some people might see that this NMP stint should be really short. Maybe not 17 days for sure, but if it's a year, is that what I want to sort of put myself forward? I still think we should, because then go for the second term, right? But I also think that it might be that more people are seeing the opposition, especially recently, playing a very constructive role, right? And maybe then that's where some of the NMPs have also expressed in the book that the people of Singapore should then determine when the NMP scheme is irrelevant, right? Because if the next cohort, there's only 10 NMPs, 10 submissions, and we choose 9 out of 10, then we will start questioning, right? And then I think that's a clear sign that maybe then the system is no longer needed. But the people have to be the one to speak on this. So we'll see. 30 is very low to get 9 out of 30 because now we have actually institutionalized the NMP scheme into a permanent feature in the Constitution. since 2010, I think. So we will always have 9 NMPs in every parliament until we do a constitutional amendment again. And so we have 30, and then the next one is going to be less. Then I think it would definitely call for a conversation on whether we need to either tweak the NMP scheme or it's no longer relevant. And in terms of the profile, for this batch, I certainly hope that we have more of NMPs that are speaking up on the issues that are deemed a minority and maybe even difficult and controversial, because we're going to see more of that. And NMPs not needing votes, yes, maybe you're worried about, the government coming after you or the opposition not wanting to be your friend. But I think this is an important opportunity for more difficult, complex issues to be raised by NMPs. So I hope we have brave, outspoken, eloquent NMPs in the next cohort.
Thank you. I was just actually mentioning to Walter recently that quite often the NMPs play the role of the voice of conscience as well for society at large. Yeah, so thank you so much to all the panel members. Thank you also to Rainer for dialing in. I think the last 1 hour, 35 minutes has been really fascinating for me as well. And I just want to add a note to say that thank you to the audience as well for your attendance, your interest in the very engaging and thought-provoking questions you've raised. Please get a copy of the book if you haven't had one already. Please, it can be purchased at the back. And also get your copy signed by the NMPs here, as well as Walter sitting here. Yeah, thank you.